Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm here doing a story time while Vivian plays a game in the background. We are on part 15 of this incredibly long story time, so catch up if you haven't already. So we are now to the point where I just filed for divorce, filed for PPO, and spoken to the victims' rights people about my husband's arrest and what was going to happen from there. So he was like texting the kids. He was trying to get a hold of me, but I was ignoring him. I had contacted a process server because I had to have him served with the PPO paperwork and with the divorce paperwork. So I got a hold of this process server, and we were trying to figure out, I didn't know where he was staying. I think he had turned off his location, or perhaps we had turned off ours, so then he couldn't, we couldn't see his anymore either. And so we weren't really sure. Actually, I must have had his location, because I remember taking screenshots and sending it to this process server and telling him, this is where he is. This is where he sometimes hangs out. But anyway, long story short, the process server had ended up finding him when he went to court, because I didn't even know any of his court dates. Like, the victims' rights people were not really good at notifying me of like court dates or things like that, but I wouldn't have wanted to go anyway. But I only found out what happened to him because he texted our middle son and told him what happened, which was he got like 9 months probation, basically, because he took a plea deal. So he pled guilty to the domestic violence. They dropped the felony interfering with electronic communications, and then he got 9 months probation. So he had to have a job, he had to do drug tests, he had to attend anger management, and he could not come near me during this whole time. Plus, I had the PPO for a year. So this process server served him with the PPO and the divorce papers. Almost immediately after that, he ended up filing to terminate the PPO. And when I got the paper in the mail, like that he was filing with a court date, attached to it was all of the information that he had wrote out this big, huge, long statement that was honestly like, it read like somebody who was using drugs would write a statement. It made no sense. It was so overdramatic. It was painting him as such a victim. Like, again, saying that I was having a relationship with another man, and so I was trying to throw him out of his house for it. And, that's where all of this came from. And that he would never lay a hand on his wife, and he would never do such a thing, and he never lays hands on his children, and just this big, long, poor me thing. And so I was like, okay, gotta go to court. I think our court date was in like November, for him to try to terminate this PPO. I had gotten a hold of a lawyer, so I had a lawyer set up. And the lawyer contacted him and said, anything that you need to say, you need to go through me. Like, do not contact your wife. You need to go through me. So that, we had that all set up, and the kids and I were kind of on edge during this time because we didn't know if he was going to try to show up. He could still access the cameras. I had no access to the cameras. He had actually set it up from the beginning that only he could access them. So I had no access to these cameras, but he could watch me. And so that was really, really nerve-wracking because, like, a friend of mine had lost her husband, and my best friend and I were going to the funeral because we had went to school with her husband and her. And so she stopped by my house to pick me up for the funeral. And after her and I left to go to this funeral, which, by the way, my oldest son had moved back home, so he was home now with his brothers so that he could keep an eye on them, if I had to, like when I went to this funeral, stuff like that. So while I'm gone, my husband texts our middle son and says, oh, so you guys replaced me already? I see your mom's already moved on. My buddy just drove by and saw her getting into a truck with some guy. Well, first of all, your buddy did not drive by. You saw it on the cameras. And second of all, that's a girl. So my son messaged him back and was like, dude, that's Aunt Jen. They're going to a funeral. And just left it at that. I don't think my ex-husband even responded. Like, that was that. And so, you know, little things like that would happen. Like a neighbor of mine, the same neighbor that had helped with the hot water heater, came to my house one day, super concerned, and he said, hey, I need to let you know, your husband was at my house, and first of all, he comes to my house so he can try to watch your house because we live so close, but far enough that the PPO, he's not violating it. But he said that he had brought up the camera feed and showed him this recording that he had that was, according to him, some man fleeing my house and running through the yard. And my neighbor was like, no one was on that video. He's like, he played it for me like 4 times, and it's like, see him? See that guy? And he said, no one was there. And he's like, I'm really concerned about you and the kids and your safety. Like, he's lost his mind. There was not a person on that video. And I said, of course there wasn't a person on that video. I don't have men coming to my house. No one comes to my house. It's me and my children. That's it. Like, at that point, literally, my best friend, my sisters, and that neighbor were the only ones that knew what was going on in my life. Oh, and obviously Vincent and Vivian's mom, because, she helped me immensely all the time. Always has. I love her. But those were the only people that knew what was actually going on. I was not saying anything on social media. I don't even know if my husband's family knew anything because my lawyer made me delete all of his family off my Facebook because she said that people could be feeding him information, because he kept calling my lawyer and harassing her and telling her that, people were telling him I was doing this and doing that. I don't think people are actually telling him that. He was just still so deeply into the drugs because he hadn't fully started his probation yet. And even if he had, he still was getting the stuff out of the system, But so he was being really unhinged. He would still try to contact me a lot, but I would just ignore it. And then he would contact the kids and just say completely off the wall things to them. So we eventually go to this PPO termination hearing, and my lawyer told me that since my husband didn't have a lawyer, he was going to be able to cross-examine me. And I was really nervous about that because I didn't know what that was going to be like. So we get there, and they put me up on the stand, and I explained to them all the different things that happened in my marriage and all the things that led up to me needing this PPO. And they asked my husband if he wants to cross-examine me. He says no. So I'm like, okay, cool. That's good at least. So then I get off the stand. They put him up on the stand, and he does this whole spiel about how, he's never hit me, but, he cops to like screaming in my face, disabling my vehicle, all those kinds of things. But he never hit me, would never hit me. So then it's my lawyer's turn to cross-examine him, and she just says to him on, whatever date it was that his hearing was, you were charged with domestic assault. What did you plead? And he says, guilty, and she says, no more questions, Your Honor, and steps off the stand. And it was like the perfect mic drop moment. It was like something out of a movie. And his jaw hit the floor, and I had to not laugh because that was just so perfect. And then, he gets off the stand, and the judge asks us for our closing remarks. She gives her closing remarks. When it's time for his closing remarks, he tries to start saying, well, she asked about me pleading guilty, but, the only reason I pled guilty. And the judge stopped him and was like, you do not want to admit to perjuring yourself in my courtroom, because then we may have to remove the plea deal and you'll serve jail time. So he immediately shut up. And then the judge spent the next 7 minutes lecturing him on how all the things that he said, at least I didn't hit her about, were still domestic violence, that he was still a domestic abuser, and that I was still a victim, which was honestly incredibly, liberating for me to hear, because I really felt like a fraud up there. But then he said, PPO will remain in place for a year. Your motion is denied. And I breathed a huge sigh of relief and left the courtroom. So I'm going to end that here. And in the next video, I will tell you, again, the aftermath of that and the divorce and all that. So thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Bye.